This video was brought to you by Imprint. Last month, Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed Sheikh al-Sadeni visited the White House to discuss strengthening bilateral relations. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go down too well with powerful Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, who have become increasingly hostile to America's remaining presence in the country since Israel's invasion of Gaza. In fact, just a few days after the meeting, a US base in Iraq was attacked by Kataib Hezbollah, the largest Iranian-backed militia in Iraq, marking the first attack on American facilities in 2 months, and the end of a ceasefire truce established in February. In fact, this all points to a wider problem for Sadani, who's been trying to carve out some form of Iraqi autonomy by reducing both American and Iranian influence in the country, without letting the waning power of one give way to a monopoly of influence for the other. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Iraq's difficult balancing act between Iran and the US, how the war in Gaza has complicated Iraq's budding friendship with America, and where Iraq goes from here. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, a bit of context on how the US and Iran got tangled in Baghdad. Now, we all know the reason why America got involved in Iraq, but in case you've been living under a rock, the US and its allies invaded Iraq in 2003 as part of its global war on terror, claiming that Saddam Hussein had access to weapons of mass destruction. As a result, the government collapsed by the end of the year, and Saddam himself was captured in 2004 and executed 3 years later. At the time, America thought that they'd be able to turn Iraq into a flourishing democracy, and there was hope in Washington that the Iraqis would elect a pro-American government in Baghdad. Unfortunately for the US, though, that's not quite how things turned out. Iraq collapsed into sectarian infighting between Shia and Sunni Muslims. Its politics entered a state of permanent dysfunction, and the US withdrew from Iraq less than a decade later. So, how did this all lead to Iran becoming a key player in Iraq? Well, despite the fact that the two countries fought a bloody and brutal war at the end of the 20th century, Iran has filled the power vacuum left by the US after the Iraq War, and was able to, in some ways, essentially take over Iraq. Iran, a Shia-majority country, managed to infiltrate most of Iraq's political class by exploiting Iraq's sectarian divide and supporting established regional militias. As a result, Iran's influence in the country steadily increased, and the Iranian-linked parties enjoyed a strong hold over the Iraqi parliament for years. In fact, a report published by the US Army in 2018 even admitted that at the time of the report's completion, an emboldened and expansionist Iran appears to be the only victor of the Iraq War. Anyway, Iran has used its presence to harass and attack the 2,500 US troops currently in Iraq, via Iranian-backed militias operating in the country, like Kataib Hezbollah. For context, a small number of US troops returned to Iraq in 2014 at the request of the Iraqi government to help them fight ISIS, and, well, they're still there nearly 10 years later. This is in part because parts of the Iraqi government were fed up with Iran's influence and saw the US as a useful counterbalance, which provoked some irritation from Iran. Iran's supreme leader even told Iraq's president directly back in April that the presence of even one American in Iraq is too much. However, in the past couple of years, Iran's influence has waned, and that's for at least 2 reasons. Firstly, Iraq's government has grown more assertive and self-confident in their dealings with Iran. In fact, Iraq has been able to exercise some kind of leverage over Iran, thanks to its role as a sort of economic gateway for Iran. Iran relies heavily on economic trade with Iraq, which serves as a lifeline for Tehran amid Western sanctions, which restrict other economic channels. Baghdad has also become somewhat of a mediator between Iran and Gulf states, allowing Iraq to exercise some diplomatic leverage. And the second reason why Iran's leverage is waning, though, is that the Iraqis have become increasingly fed up with Iran's influence. In 2019, there were massive protests against the Iranian-backed government for failing to deliver a good standard of living and blaming Iran for corruption-related governance issues. And perhaps as a result, Iran-linked parties performed pretty terribly in the 2020 elections. In fact, a 2022 poll found that nearly half of Iraqis believe that Iran poses the biggest security threat to their country, most likely because of years of sporadic assaults on US bases by Iraqi militias. And on top of that, the Sunni former deputy prime minister went as far as explicitly criticizing Kataib Hezbollah and other paramilitaries for endangering Iraq in their attacks on US bases. Now, it's worth saying that just because many Iraqis are anti-Iran doesn't mean that they're pro-American, and there have been reoccurring protests demanding a complete withdrawal of US forces from the country since at least 2020. And these demands became even louder following Israel's war in Gaza, thanks to the US's unwavering support for Israel. In fact, it's probably worth diving deeper into how the war in Gaza has complicated relations here. That's because ever since October 7th, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq have increased the frequency of their attacks on US military bases. Things escalated particularly in February after a US drone strike hit a car in a residential neighborhood in Baghdad, killing 3 members of Kataib Hezbollah. The US military's presence in Iraq was subsequently described as a factor for instability by a spokesperson for the Iraqi military, and the Iraqi government even initiated talks on America's total withdrawal. A ceasefire was then subsequently agreed between US troops and militias, contingent on the direction in which these talks progressed. This has all left Sudani with a difficult dilemma, because he does recognize the value of the US's presence in counterbalancing the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, who have played a particularly destabilizing role in Iraq since October 7th. And it's likely that some of these issues were even raised during Sudani's meeting with Biden in April, where he affirmed that Iraq is transitioning from military relations to a full partnership with the United States. But unsurprisingly, this hasn't gone down too well with pro-Iranian militias, and fighting resumed late last month. While the group argued that this was in response to little progress on negotiation with getting US troops out, according to some analysts, the attacks were also a way of signaling Iran's disapproval of Sudani's visit to Washington. Now, neither the Iraqi government nor its population wants to be party to a US-Iranian confrontation on their territory, or face a wider regional conflict. But they are also firmly against Israel's actions in Gaza, with a large majority of Iraqis backing the Palestinian cause and strongly opposing normalization between Arab states and Israel. And this is why Sudani has recently been trying to assert some form of Iraqi autonomy. Neither the US nor Iran are particularly popular with the Iraqi electorate, and their lingering influence in Iraq puts the country at risk of being sucked into a wider conflict in the Middle East. Whether he can recalibrate relations with America and Iran without irritating one or the other remains to be seen. But it's a necessary step if Iraq is finally going to regain some political autonomy, 20 years after the beginning of the Iraq War. Solving conflicts like this is clearly a difficult challenge, but if you want to get better at it personally, then you might want to take Imprint's course on interpersonal dynamics, the psychology of human relationships. Just like TLDR, Imprint is all about turning complex books and topics into something you can learn quickly, conveniently, and visually. It's super quick, with most lessons only taking about 2 minutes to complete, summarizing knowledge from all kinds of topics, using Harvard professors and best-selling authors to teach you the concepts. It's also convenient because it's all housed within their easy-to-use mobile app, letting you replace doom scrolling while you're waiting for your train or coffee with actual learning. It's also visual because, well, look at that app. If you've not used it before, then it's likely you've never seen anything quite like it. Unlike traditional books, their animated explainers help you stay focused, understand concepts quickly, and actually retain what you learn. So join the millions of users learning with Imprint, including me. I'm currently taking their course called How to Change Your Mind right now. And you can do that by clicking the link in the description. Plus, if you use that link, you'll get a 7-day free trial and 20% off an annual plan when you sign up. Plus, you'll know that they came from us. So check it out, support the channel, and thanks for watching TLDR.